I'm happy to introduce Chiara Cappelletto. Thank you for coming. And Chiara Cappelletto, for who doesn't know her already, is an associate professor in aesthetics at the University of Milan, an associate member of a research center called CRAL, which is Centre de Recherche sur les Arts, well, on arts and language. Her major research interests are studies and rhetorics. She works on theater as a cognitive apparatus, so actually I think there's quite a lineage or a link to some of the references that Warren was talking about, at least with Antonia and Artaud. Among her main interests is also the notion of fiction and the construction of the self. She has been fellow at the Italian Academy at Columbia University, and I know that she's working on a book with Columbia University at the moment, and at the Institut d'études avancées in Paris, and at the Kolleg Forschergruppe Bildevidenz, Geschichte und Ästhetik in Berlin. In 2016, she has been visiting scholar and co-teacher at the Princeton University. She runs the Permanent Research Seminar, PIS, which is Performing Identities Seminar. In 2005, she won the 9th Castiglioncello Philosophical Award for young researchers. And among her various publications, one stands out particularly in this context, which is Neuroaesthetics, The Art of the Brain, published by La Terza in 2012. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll leave the floor to you.
So thank you for inviting me, and I take the pleasure to speak Italian, as Antonia allowed me to do. I know, Warren, I know, I never do that. So today I try to, but I can translate myself. I read like 5 sentences. May I? Well, you, somebody in the crew. Okay, I will try, I will translate myself. Okay, I'll go in English. Okay, I will go in English. So I will start by showing you, just for you. I will start, you're welcome. By showing you this magnificent picture painting by Ingres, who is describing the King François going to visit for his last time Leonardo da Vinci dying, according to what Vasari told in his lives. And Vasari says that King François could go to visit for the last time Leonardo because Leonardo was dying in the king's residence, which is a fake news. Leonardo didn't die at the king's home. Why do I quote this quite traditional reference within art history? Because I want to make a clear distinction between what is a lie and what is fake news. Lies, made up discourses, made up images have always played a huge role in our culture without creating a real problem, because somehow lies are just the opposite of truth. So there is a huge presumption of the fact that truth is actually working for us, and we try to adjust it, if you want. What is going on now with this fake news concept is something, I think, completely different. And this is the reason why it is so interesting to talk about it. The second thing I want to make clear is that there is an implicit polemic target within my talk today. And my target is a part of my colleagues, of especially analytics philosophers, who still buy a notion of truth, which is simply, which is of course very correct, but which is exclusively logical. Like A is true, and A is not A is false. And they apply with quite a passion this notion to explain the current debate and the current state of the art in politics and let's say culture in a broad sense. I would call it civic culture. Ending their talks and their articles and their books just adding that, of course, who doesn't follow, who doesn't apply this correct notion of truth is wrong. And so let's hope, and I'm quoting very precisely, let's hope that culture or some illumination help us to reject the violence of our current political debate. But let's hope it's not a philosophical statement, it's not an epistemic statement, it's not a logical statement. And I'm taking this very seriously because this is working within our scientific community. So there is a kind of defense of what truth is, with a capital T, and a kind of quite naive and I would say childish anguish that we are trying to contain, hoping. So to transform hope, which is a theological virtue, in a mundane, in a practical, in a lifetime intellectual agent, I think we have to go back to what culture is. And of course, we can have many different definitions of what culture is. Of course, I know I am moving myself within the Western boundaries. I mean, I take it just for granted. We can discuss it, but this is my boundaries here together with you. So we have many different definitions of what culture is, and I will quote that given by Roland Barthes, just because I found it absolutely magnificent and extremely useful for us, because he says in an not very often quoted small book, he wrote for himself to study rhetorics. And there are not so many books about rhetoric, so he made small books for himself to sum up the treatise on rhetorics. And he describes culture as a natural contagion. Please correct me if I'm quoting wrong. A natural contagion in which each of us participates autonomously with pleasure, going from the unknown towards what is known, and this going is what culture is. So it's a discursive, collective, shared, explicit process. And within this process, we have to fight to defend and attack each other's positions, but this fight is public and brings everybody a huge pleasure. And I think this is very important. The pleasure element is very important for him. So for Barthes, the main feature of what culture is rhetorics. And at the point that he says, and I found this extremely powerful epistemically, he says that rhetorics is the real Western agent. We are used to think, to describe ourselves as Westerns, as people educated within a philosophical and theological paradigm. What he's saying is that, okay, we can say that's fine, but before this philosophical, meaning Greek, theological paradigm, there has been rhetorics that shaped the very possibility of having a theological and philosophical paradigm, because rhetorics shaped the very idea of what an argumentation is. So without rhetorics, we could have not been able to forge something as philosophy and then theology. So how can we, I mean, in 30 minutes, how can we describe what rhetorics is? Three main features have to be recalled. The first one, rhetorics works within life, within real life, daily life, current life. And taking into consideration humans as historical and natural living beings. There is no abstraction. Second, rhetorics work within a polemic stage. Polemics is absolutely necessary to develop any kind of argumentation. Polemics is not conflicts, it's not war, it's not oppositions. Polemics is the recognition of each other positions and the fact that you allow the other to have a different position. So polemics is absolutely positive and generative. The third feature is that to build any argumentation, you need evidences. And there are two different kinds of evidences. The one is historical documents, witnesses, facts, and the other is, this is called like extra rhetorical evidences. And then you have intra rhetorical evidences like arguments, topos, it's said in the jargon. So, what is the place of fake news within this main paradigm? There is no place for fake news within these paradigms because fake news are not fake evidences. Fake news, and you made reference to Pizzagate and other mirabilia that we heard about. Fake news are, of course, you need the falsification of evidences to have fake news, but that's not enough. You need to have the falsification or the made up, the clearly made up, the falsification of news, and then you have to buy this fictitious evidence, and you buy this fictitious evidence because you like to buy it. There is a cognitive preference that leads you to buy this fakeness, and you do not buy it because you have a personal interest, because it is convenient for you. You buy it because, I mean, it can be convenient, but it can also not be convenient. You buy it because you feel yourself allowed to do it. So you think about you as a fellow citizen. You feel yourself allowed to take a personal responsibility and decide just for yourself that this is the truth that you want to believe. So you do not put yourself in a social, polemic environment, but you build, you shape, you design your own idiosyncratic, individualistic, personal, exclusive environment. And many times we hear that there is no politics anymore. I think this is completely fake. If there is a political time, is now. What is changing is society, it's not politics. It's the very idea of what a society is what is changing, because it's the very idea of what a subject is changing. How did we arrive to this point, if you agree with me, and if not? I think there are three main reasons, of course out of many others, but three main reasons that can explain how we arrive to this completely to this process of resignification of what being in a society is. The first one is what Lyotard has described as postmodernism, and in his report, because it was a report, it wasn't a philosophical essay, it was a report commissioned by the Canadian government. And he wrote, it was the 1979, and he wrote down very clearly, very plainly, that what was going on is the changing of the status, of epistemic status, of what connoisseurship and knowledge was. And the knowledge was going to be, ending to be a social narrative, and was becoming a sum of data with economic value. And so the point was the people supposed to be cultivated were going to be the people with at their disposal data with an economic value. The second point is neuroculture, and I call it cerebrocentrism, and I think that the one I make reference to, what I call cerebrocentrism, is what you just called positivist neuroscientists, I think. So a kind of very naively reductionist approach to what we are used to understand as a neuroculture. I'm not saying that neuroscientists say that. I'm saying that scholars in humanities, for example, or common people understand our current culture as a neuroculture, where three things happens. The first one is the idea of localization, as if we can understand where feelings, emotions, desires, cognitive process happens. Of course, it's extremely naive, but this is what common people think. I can see, I can know where this is going on, and this is where is within our brain. And this within is very interesting because refers to an old Western assumption according to which veritas is in interiore homine. What is true about ourselves is hidden, is private, is concealed. So localization, internalization, and privatization, because of course nobody can really know what is in my mind. The third element after light postmodernism and neuroculture is truthiness. And I think that the American public here knows what truthiness is, but maybe other don't. So truthiness is a definition made in 2005, but I think a great, he's a comedian, but he's also a great interpreter of our time, which is Stephen Colbert. And Stephen Colbert at that time was the host of the Colbert Report, and he gave this show on Bush, talking about the second Iraqi war, and this is his definition. Of course, he's criticizing Bush, and he's criticizing Bush because Bush, as we know, used faked evidences. But this wasn't his point. His point was the kind of truth that Bush was shaping, and I quote him. He went like, "What I say is right." This is his definition of truthiness. What I say is right, and nothing anyone else says could possibly be true. It's not only that I feel it to be true, it's that I feel it to be true. There is not only an emotional quality, but there is a selfish quality. And so this, I think, is important to recall, because we are not living in a time of doxa. I think there is something very different going on now. We are living in a time with the epistemic value of doxa as deeply changed. It's no more the good old relativism according to which everybody can say what he thinks, and if it's reasonable, why you cannot support it, even though you don't agree with it. It's okay. We share different opinions. It's not that. When I talk about communist opinions, of course I make reference to, like, for understand, Habermas and the bourgeois time in which newspapers came out. I mean, this important thing that was communist opinions as a cultural and political element necessary to build up what a society has been. It's not communist opinions anymore. It's not what Heidegger called the singular third person, like one says. Somebody there says that, and this third singular person is, of course, has no authority because there is no author there. It's a kind of ongoing, discourse that cannot be verified in any way. It's not this. It's a you say cacophony? Okay. It's a cacophony of singularity, is a cacophony of individuals. Each of these individuals speaks for herself or for himself. This is what is, and he thinks to be allowed to do so. So they are these kind of individuals. We are not looking for any kind of recognitions. We are not looking for being appreciated or validated. We do not think anymore this is necessary. Within this frame, what has been called post-truth, I think is an extremely over-quoted notion, but post-truth has started to be quoted as an epistemic concept in 2016. Everybody knows that, but I want to recall because it's interesting to quote what the Oxford dictionary says. First of all, post-truth is not a noun, is an adjective, while truth is normally a noun. But the Oxford says, I quote, an adjective defined as relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal beliefs. That's of course quite silly, because everybody knows that emotions are fundamental to shape any kind of logic discourse. So this idea that emotion do not play any role or could not play any role within rationality is naive, to say the least. But this is not my point. My point is that the idea of post-truth is a symptomatic idea. It's an idea that has no epistemic value, but it's very interesting to understand why we think we are living in a post-truth time. And what is post-truth symptomatic of? Well, it's symptomatic of a rupture of what rhetoric has called rhetoric agreement. To have a discourse, to partake, to be part of a public discourse, to have to make an agreement within which we cannot agree, we can disagree, but in order to disagree, we have to have this pact before. And this rhetoric pact is recognize to each other the fact that we are accountable. So what is post-truth about? Post-truth is not about fakeness. Post-truth is not about lies or made up things or alternative facts. Post-truth is about distrust. Post-truth is about the idea that we do not need to trust each other in order to take the floor and say something to which. And so this becomes the problem. Who is our public? Who is our audience? And here, social media that are wrongly called social media comes into play. Because when you address your audience through a social media, you, figure out a discourse in which I speak for myself, I speak to everybody there, but I do not speak for everybody. So what is gone is the representational link, according to which when I take the floor and I speak for somebody, I presume to speak the truth, not just for myself, but for at least one other people. This is called representational building, of course, and has huge impact on politics, of course. So what's going on now is that we are reframing, reshaping the very idea of public discourse, because when we go public within the social media, we go public indeed. But we speak for ourselves, and somehow we don't care if our discourse can be can be shared with others. And this, I mean, we could do a rhetoric analysis of no matter which page on Facebook or Twitter. We could really analyze rhetorically how each orator speaks out and see what is different in respect to a most traditional public discourse. Am I framing a kind of apocalyptic landscape? No, this is not my point. I'm trying to understand how our idea of public subject is changing. I think it is, and how this new subject that we are becoming can interact in a social productive way. And I think that what you just said before, referring to the newer society, the newer economy, matches quite well with this new individual, no more rhetoric subject that is taking the floor to speaking for himself to whoever wants to listen to him or her, but not with no desire somehow to participate in a more shared, critical and polemic collective discourse. Thank you. Any questions?
Maybe I'll go. Thank you so much for this. I guess there's various, so essentially you are critical of the definition of post-truth as a definition per se. I'm just wondering also what definition actually you would then sort of coin in order to nevertheless explain what you actually just explained in terms of, on the one hand, the new individual, let's say, that shares and actually maybe even makes a point of sharing only for himself. Like, I think there's something about this extremization of the society of the self in that. So it's not about, but also there must be something about new technological developments such as social media in which, as you were saying, there's no editorial responsibility at all in a sense as well. So also when we look at bots and also sort of fake identities that whatever produce conflict, etc., there's this like lack of responsibility actually that I think magazines or journals or like would have such a different structure that would at least hold responsible someone at the end for the speech act that is performed. And yeah, I would just like to know more.
Yeah, thank you. Right, there are three questions there, I think. The first one is what is my definition to correct the post-truth one? I have none, because I don't think we need it. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with post-truth. I'm just saying that post-truth doesn't define anything. We do not need it to understand or explain our current epistemic time. I think that, on the contrary, we can take it, because post-truth is perfectly fine as a symbolic expression of how we conceive and also how we experience, because we are we are imbalanced. We are not. I think we are living in an interesting time, because we are coming from an old time going to another, which is quite unknown yet. So I'm fine with post-truth. I just don't want to take it seriously epistemically, because it's an empty concept that doesn't lead anywhere. But it's perfectly useful if you work with it as I just said, as a symptomatic notion. So first questions. Lack of responsibility, yes, enormous. I have no idea. I think that people working in the fields of law and neurosciences are doing an extremely interesting work. They can be I think that we could have interesting conversations going on with them. I haven't, honestly, I don't have any idea. And there is a reason why I don't have any answers to your question, because the very notion of responsibility that we manage is a very old one. It's a concept of responsibility that refers to a certain notion of law and government. And this very notion of law and this very notion of governments are changing. So I think that we won't have a new notion of responsibility, except of a very basic moral responsibility for the next decade at least. And you are perfectly right. We are struggling with an old notion of public responsibility that clearly doesn't work anymore. A more personal, moral, ethical, affective notion of responsibility that works perfectly well, but it's not enough to deal with what's going on. And then I have no idea. I do not think that we can legislate on it, or that we can, exactly for the reason I just mentioned. The legislation is something that is going to be revised. So I can't imagine, there is a lack of imagination from my side. I can't imagine who or what will be the real agent of the new definition of what a public responsibility is. Speech acts. Somehow I come back to my question to Warren before, because I think that we are performed by our speech acts. We are not just the agent, the actor, the subject in the sense of the active subject of something, be it discourse, social life, or anything. We are performed back. There is a feedback loop performed by media, technology, new blockchain, I mean, new kind of social interactions. And we are starting to see how these feedbacks works. Not sure we are prepared enough to see it. Somehow what you are saying, this brain without organ society, where everything is simultaneous, but the simultaneity is itself a kind of intersection of different simultaneities. It's going on, but let's put it that way. We should be more careful in not being theological, in not being too normative in predicting what's going on. I think there is an enormous feedback effect that we are starting to experience now, and that's very interesting. And speech acts, so just to come back to your question more precisely, speech acts perform this feedback loop on speakers.
No, I come from a kind of digital media sociology kind of background, so it's interesting that the consensus in the field is more, that you are speaking for a public, and that's a kind of the whole notion of echo chamber and bubble, and in a sense the kind of the post-truth depends on the existence of a social group which has become insulated through algorithmic technologies, and the whole question of the quantification of social feelings such as approval through the likes is interpreted in terms of social capital. Interesting, 3 weeks ago was at this conference where Bernard Stiegler started with this post-truth statement, which should be cheap shot maybe, but it was like post-truth is about today's notion of false consciousness, like it's something that intellectuals use when they want to say that people don't understand or they are gullible. Yeah. And so you have that, and then on the other hand, I was reading about kind of the social epistemologists such as Steve Fuller, who like takes the post-truth meme to the extreme, saying, yeah, of course, the whole, it's a very democratic, post-truth is democratic, because that means that kind of academics can no longer claim to have a monopoly on truth, and everything now has to go through this kind of the participatory epistemologies. So there is this tension. It's interesting the way in which post-truth as a term performs all these political differences in relation to kind of participatory forms of knowledge. But you know, my main point was that the kind of digital media sociology tends to think the opposite. There is a very strong relationship between the kind of the profile and the public, the social network.
Yeah, thank you very much for your for your comment. First thing, I can't agree with Stigler when he says that post-truth is a way in which dismantled elites try to define snobbish what truth is nowadays. In the sense that I do think that there is a laziness going on, at least within the scholarly community, when we try to understand what's going on. It's just what I tried to say before, referring to the let's hope. Actually was, everything is recorded, so I can say it. It was Paul Bogossian saying, let's hope Trump's voter will finally understand the truth. But this wasn't your point. I do not think, so going to your real point, I do not think that post-truth is democratic in the sense, I mean, at least not, it would be too fast to say it's demagogic, it would be too fast, but I do not think it's democratic because post-truth dismantles what is for me a presumption for a democratic government, which is representation. So saying that post-truth is democratic because now everybody can... Okay. Yeah, I see the point, but I do not think that flatness is democratic at all. Okay, but, okay. So going back to the echo chamber, which was your real... I see your point. I think that I have two answers. The first one is what implicitly, and I'm sorry to have left it implicit, I was referring to what in rhetorics you define as the deliberative discourse. Do you say that? Like the discourse that you have to persuade something about a collective issue. So it's very specific. It's the most political discourse. But this doesn't answer completely to your question because it's not just about the narrowing my talk. So my real answer is a question back to you. Do you think that echo chambers are stable? Because I think they are not. I mean, echo chambers change very fast. You can be part of an echo chamber for like 1 hour, 2 hours, 1 month, 3 months, for a small period of time, and then you just decide, or it happens that you leave these echo chambers. So echo chambers are too small and too seems to me to be too small and too their time life is too short to be considered as a proper audience for public issues. We're not talking about a group of friends sharing preferences on music and books. I mean, I'm not talking about it, at least. We are talking about a more large, stable audience which can take responsibility for their actions for a longer time. So the very notion of echo chambers is, I think, completely effective if your problem is narrowed to what a communication is, but not enough comprehensive if you change perspective. Did I answer your question? Yeah, I know. It's a different scholarly perspective.